Right guys, well as you can see we're currently lying under the car. This is the space where the fuel tank used to be. I'm hoping that I can put some of the battery modules into here. I will have to make some sort of a box to contain the modules. I'll have to figure out some way to mount the box, but hopefully that shouldn't be too hard. To try and figure out how many modules I can get in here, I have been playing with cardboard again, and I've made up 3 of these cardboard battery modules. They're pretty much the same size as the larger modules, and as you can see they actually fit in there quite nicely. However, if this was a 2-wheel drive car this would all be fine, but it's not. It's a 4-wheel drive car, and this is the rear diff, and this rear diff, although it's not a live axle, it is just mounted on the rear subframe, with half shafts going out to each of the wheels. It does move around a little bit. It's on rubber bushings, and obviously there'll be some degree of movement. So I was originally going to put them like this. Hopefully you can see that. Yep. But I think I'm too close. By the time we have the case of the battery box built and everything mounted, it's just a bit too tight to that prop shaft. So what instead I'm going to do, I think, is set that there, put 2 modules like that, put another 2 end to end, and that gives me lots of clearance to the prop shaft. It loads of space there, and then I could put another 2 in behind that either side, and that would give me 6 here in the old fuel tank. Now possibly I could get more in there, possibly, but to be honest, the further I go back the tighter it gets to the rear diff. So I want to stay well clear of the rear diff. I don't want it wobbling around at the back as I'm driving around and bashing into my battery box. So I think that's what I'm going to do. 3 either 3 there and 3 there, I think is going to be the way to do this. I guess the other alternative would be to have 2 there and 2 there, and maybe 2 of the short ones here, possibly. But I think to try and squeeze that in would be getting very tight. Right guys, well this is Mark 1 of my battery box to go into the fuel tank area. Now, as you can see, I've designed it such that the 2 batteries sit side by side like that, and then there's room for one of the small ones to fit back here. Now I think originally I had wanted to put 2 of these flat behind, but that didn't really work out because of the diff. For various reasons there's lots of things that are in the way or potentially in the way, and are stopping me from putting more than what you can see into the space. What I've got here is 2 of the larger modules. There'll be another 2 here, so that's 4 large modules and 2 small modules, and as you can see, more CAD design work going on. And the reason that I'm going for this layout is because the further I go back in the space for the fuel tank, the tighter it gets to the drive shafts, the rear drive shafts. Now the rear drive shafts are able to move around because the diff that they're attached to is mounted on rubber bushings. So there's movement back there, and the front of the battery box is very close to the connection where the prop shaft bolts onto the rear diff. So there's potential movement there. So I need to make sure that there's plenty of space between all these moving parts of the rear drivetrain and my battery box. I cannot afford to go to all the time and effort and expense of building a battery box and getting it installed, and then finding out when I go to drive the car down the road that the drivetrain is bouncing off the battery box. So can't have that. So I'm being cautious and conservative, and just I'll stick with 4 large and 2 small in the space for the fuel tank. Possibly I could put more in, but I'm not going to risk it. Also, I'm not that skillful a fabricator, so building this battery box is going to be a big enough challenge without building it to very exacting specifications and squeezing it into a tiny space. So now that I've finalized on the design of the battery box, I figured it would make sense to work out exactly how I'm going to bolt the battery modules onto the battery box, because whatever way they're held together is obviously going to affect the amount of space that I have available. So with that in mind, I started designing the bracketry to hold the battery box, or sorry, the battery modules. So this is what I've come up with, and I think it should be okay. Basically the plan is, when the battery box is built, there will be probably raised bits along the bottom, and there will be studs sitting up from the slightly raised bits. Those studs will go into holes that will drill into these brackets. These brackets are held, or holding the battery modules with long pieces of threaded rod. This is this sort of stuff here. It's M8 threaded rod. So the threaded rod is going through between the 2 battery modules. Now, as you can see, these are only small modules because it just makes it easier for me to handle them and so on when I'm making these brackets. I will be putting these brackets onto the larger modules. We have threaded rod going through here. Now, the problem I had was I went to put nuts on the end of the threaded rod and discovered there really isn't enough space for a nut in there. Well, there's space for a nut, but there's not space for me to put a socket or a spanner over that nut to try and turn it. So as you can see, it's all quite tight. Maybe see it better in this one. Try and get it to focus. So you can see there really isn't very much space there. So I had to come up with an alternative way of bolting the batteries together on this threaded rod. So you can see what I've come up with. And basically, take that box out of the way. I bought some of these, which are M8 Allen key bolts, very, very short, they're only 10mm. And I also bought some of these, which are 20mm threaded rod connectors. Now, that goes on there, like so. So, not easy to do this one-handed. So, anyway, that goes on there like so, and you get the picture. And then, just to make sure that whenever I started to unscrew this, that the whole thing came off, I put a little weld on each one of them. In fact, I actually cut these down because they were 20mm and I needed them to be approximately 15mm. So I cut about 5mm off each of these, so that it would be approximately the right length. They're not going to stick out. And also it means that there's space here for the bolt which is going down. Now what I did was I put a nut on like so, and then I put a long 1/4 inch throttle socket over that to make sure there's enough space. So that's going to be around about there. So what I need to do then is to drill holes in each of these brackets so that when the battery modules are set down into the battery box, they set down over the studs, and then just take my lock washers and put them down, or lock nuts, and put them down over the threaded the studs that are coming up through. So that is the design I came up with. I've also, on these, what I'll do is I'll take one of these off and I'll let you see just exactly how I've made that. Right, so as you can see, it's a simple piece of angled steel. These were originally UPS support brackets, or rails. Very simple piece of angle iron. I cut slots here, and then I cut small pieces of steel the correct size, put holes, drilled holes in them, and then put this piece of steel onto the battery. Put my little bits of steel through with the rod going through, and then just put a little spot weld onto each of them just to hold them and hold the bits of metal in position, which meant that I could then take them off and weld them up properly, or as properly as my welding ever is. But as you can see, they're quite tight, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. There we go. So that's how that was done. Everything is being held together nice and tight, and what I'll do is basically that will sit like that, and then this, if I can do this one-handed without dropping it. So those batteries, obviously these will be the long modules, but they'll be sitting back to back like that. Just like so. So that's the way we're doing it, unless somebody comes up with a better idea. But this was the only way I could think of being able to put a nut on the end of each of these that would be accessible for a device for taking them in and out, and would be sufficiently strong to do the job. Hopefully the next step, once we've got the test fit of the big modules, is then to start manufacturing this box. Haven't figured out yet how I'm going to do that, but that's the next job. Ta-da! Weldy, weldy, weld. Job's a good one. So as you can see, guys, that's the floor of the box. It's made from, I think it's something like 1.5mm steel. And the plan is to weld it into position. Now that may or may not turn out to be a bad idea, because my welding isn't brilliant, as I've said before, and trying to get this completely watertight by welding is probably not going to happen. But if I get it mostly watertight by welding and then fill it full of silicone, then that should be good enough. keep going around like that till we get it all done. Alright, well that's not too bad. I've tacked it all the way around so that no bits hopefully should warp and come out of shape. So I'll go ahead and join up all the tacks now. It's not the neatest welding I've ever seen, but we're getting there. I'll just do that all the way around and I'll bring it back when it's done. Well, unfortunately, just as things were going swimmingly, I ran out of gas and it started getting horrible again, so I shall get some gas tomorrow, and in the meantime I'll cut out some more floor plates for the bottom and the sides and whatever. I'll just do a bit of grinding and cutting tonight and come back to the welding tomorrow. As you can see, we've made a lot of progress. We have welded on sides everywhere. It's welded all the way around. Haven't gone too mad with the welding at the top, simply because the lid will be going over that, so not too concerned about that. So that's where we currently are. As you can see, I've made little holes to get at the screws, so we can screw we can get the screws in to screw the batteries down. And as you can see, this is more or less where the battery's going to sit, somewhere about here. But as you can see, the battery terminals, I can get you down in there, are down here. Now if I use an ordinary crimp connection there, it's going to be perilously close to the sidewall. And I know I can insulate it, but I would rather it wasn't touching the sidewall at all, or at least not that close. We cannot afford that this suddenly tries to go 300 odd volts, so hence why I'm hesitant about doing that, which is why I wanted to use these, because they are so just designed for the job. I'll have a wee think about that and come back. Alright guys, well I've painted myself into a bit of a corner here where these, as you can see, I have bent at right angles which hopefully will still allow me to get at the screw to tighten it up, but will be far enough out of the way, if I can get it in here, far enough out of the way that I can do that. Now, cutting away a little bit of this is not an issue. So I think I shall cut away this and this just at these points and see how we get on. I think that's going to be the best bet. Okay guys, well after a wee bit of a rethink, I think this is the road we're going to go down. All I've done is to bend up the crimp terminals at the corner. They're copper, so they should be able to bend without too much trouble. I'm not going to work hard unless I was flexing back and forward. So as you can see, that is got a fair bit of clearance. Now obviously I need to put heat shrink, maybe ×2 or ×3 onto these terminals to make sure that nothing shorts out against the side, and possibly even try and fit in some bits of plastic or something into the sides there to insulate a bit. But I think that's going to be the answer to this little conundrum. Much as I would like to have used these old connections, they were particularly convenient in some respects. It's just in the way that I've designed this box, they're just too tight. Maybe in the next box they might work, but in this one, no, they don't work. Too tight. So, anywho, at least it means I can save this. And it's not too difficult to bend these things around, so I think that's going to be the way we go. Right, get a bit more done and I'll come back and show you where we're at. Hello guys, just wanted to give you a quick update as to where we are with this EV build. I know you've seen this a couple of times now, the battery box. This is almost finished. I still need to do some holes in the side for the power and BMS cables to go in and out, and put brackets on it to hold the lid on and get the whole thing secured, figure out how I'm going to secure it under the car. But I'm going to worry about that later, because basically I got bored of working at this. I was spending that much time on it. So as you can see, I've got it painted white. That is not undercoat, that is the top coat. I happen to have a tin of Rust-Oleum white paint, which I didn't have very much other use for, so I thought might as well use it for this. Moving on from that, the next thing I did then was to just come back in to try and figure out what I'm going to do with the engine bay stroke motor bay. Well, the first thing I did was, because the radiator is going to have to be in place, this is the Nissan Leaf radiator with a couple of brackets. As you can see, I made up some brackets to go top and bottom, same both sides. And those are holding this nice and solid. It's not going anywhere. So the radiator's nice and solid, and mounted using the original rubber mounting points. They're just painted with zinc primer and then some stone chip just to give some protection. And in the engine stroke motor bay, I'm now trying to figure out where I'm going to put this. The big question is, do I mount it to the motor and gearbox and have it sitting on that, or do I create a cradle within the engine bay here for it? Haven't finally decided that one yet. I can't see any reason why it couldn't be mounted on the motor, because I know the Gen 2 and Gen 3 were both mounted on the motor as a single stack. So yeah, so I can't see any reason why it would be an issue, so long as the power cable is coming into to feed. This is the 380 odd volts or 400 volts in. As long as that cable is well isolated from anything that would cause it to chafe or cause any issues. This is the main three-phase power that comes from the motor. That cable comes from the motor and goes up inside here at this end. So where it is, I think, is probably going to be the location. The only question is whether or not it's mounted on the chassis or mounted on the motor. Have to think about that one. Anyway, that's where we are for now. Oh yes, this area here will be used for this, and this is my design for, or something like, it'll be something like this. This is a car alternator which has been converted to be a motor, and it will drive the power steering pump, and they will both hopefully fit quite nicely here, with the alternator motor down here and the pump up here. And then this pipe, which is the power steering high pressure pipe, that can go into the top of the power steering pump. This is the original Freelander power steering pump, and then the return just has to come up to the the header tank. So that's kind of where we are at the moment. Until I can get the alternator fitted, or sorry, until I get the inverter fitted, I won't be able to finally decide what batteries I can put in here. I'm hoping to put a row of batteries in here, but there's going to have to be another 2 boxes in here for other things. Charger, and the charger has to go in here, and also the high voltage switch box. So there's other things to go in here, so there's not as much room as I was sort of hoping, to be honest, but there's enough that we should be able to get a sizable number of our batteries under the bonnet. And that means that if there's some here, some where the fuel tank was, and some at the very back, hopefully that will be enough. I haven't actually done the maths yet, but I'm hoping it's going to be enough. Yeah, sorry, the boss came around and distracted me then. Hopefully that should be enough space for all of the batteries, but if it's not, I'll just have to put some behind the rear seats in the boot. I know that's going to significantly compromise the boot of the car, but it's just what I'm going to have to do. But we'll cross that bridge if we come to it. For now, the important thing is to try and make a frame. What I'm planning to do is, the 2 chassis legs are nicely there, nicely available. So a steel bar going across from there to there, and another one from there to there will give me some sort of a framework to then start building up on, to build a way of holding the alternator motor and the power steering pump. So I have to do all that. That'll be at this end. I don't really want to build another really complex... Oh yeah, there's another thing I forgot about. This is the air pump, vacuum pump rather, for the brakes, power brakes. So that has to be mounted, but I'm hopeful that that can go somewhere about there. Something like that. And this is all just foam, so that'll be able to move. So I'm hoping that'll go into there, and then this is the brake pipe, the vacuum pipe. So that should be not too big an issue. But like I say, getting this whole thing here is going to be my big problem for now. And I've sort of decided to put the building of battery boxes on the back burner for now while I get this done. So that's where we're at. You get a bit more done, I'll come back.